Hi everybody, I'm Kay Warren from Saddleback, and we are here today with some of my favorite pastors' wives. This is Hannah and Amy and Steph, and I'm going to let them tell you about themselves in just a second. But we are just so glad that you are with us. I have to tell you, this is the first time I think any of us have ever done this, so if we make complete and utter fools of ourselves, you will be gracious, right? And they won't even be gracious, so somebody will be gracious and give us a little slack. But we are here because we want to talk about what it's like to be in ministry. We figured out that between us we have 91 years of ministry experience, so I mean we are like the Yodas of pastor's wife ministry. Not really, but so Shondell Holliday is the wife of Pastor Tom Holliday, one of our teaching pastors. She also happens to be my sister in love, so she's the sister of my heart, and she's going to be taking your questions and then giving them to us. You can write them in the box below, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. We are really glad you're with us. So I want to just take a minute. I'll tell you a quick version of my life. I grew up in a pastor's home. I married a pastor. Rick and I have been married almost 42 years, and 3 amazing kids and 5 grandchildren, and I say I have loved almost every minute of being a pastor's wife. There have been a few that I wish that Rick had been anything but a pastor, a plumber. I didn't care, just anything but a pastor. But generally, it has been something that I have loved. So I come at it from hopefully a positive perspective, and that the things that we'll talk about will be things that will also give you inspiration and encouragement and guidance to live this life of ministry that God has called you to live. So I want to start and let them tell about themselves. Hannah, you're like, if we just go down the row here, you are the first in line, so tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, so my name is Hannah, and my husband is the campus pastor at Saddleback.
You might have to talk just a little bit louder.
Okay. Okay, so my name is Hannah, and my husband and I have been in ministry for 13 years. We've been married for almost 13 years. We started off church planting in a small church in Diamond Bar, California, and we were there for 8 years before we transitioned over here to Saddleback. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and he's in Dallas, Texas, and I did not grow up in a pastor's as a pastor's kid. I did not get married thinking that I was marrying a pastor. In fact, I told my husband I did not want to marry a pastor. And he also
famous last words.
Yes, and he also told me, I don't want to be a pastor either. And I'm like, great, this is going to work out. But lo and behold, God called him and tugged on his heart, and here we are today. A little short story about myself. I met my husband through his mom. She met me back when I was in pharmacy school in Atlanta. And she flew back to California after 15 minutes, and she says, I really like you. Can I get your email address? I emailed him. 2 months down on the phone, he asked me to marry him. I cried. I don't know why I said yes, but I said yes. And then we finally met at 4 months, and then I moved over a couple months later, and then we got married the following year.
I love that, because you were telling me the other day that like you didn't even send him a picture of yourself. So
before he asked
he even asked you to marry.
Have you seen your face?
No.
Yes, I know.
Had you seen his face?
Yes.
Okay, so just checking. Just checking. I love that. I said that is just a classic, how did you meet your husband kind of story. That is great.
It was fun.
Hannah wins for the best story.
That's right, I know. Nobody can top that one. Amy, tell us a little about you.
I am Amy Hilliker, and I am a pastor's wife. My husband is the pastor over ministry at our Saddleback Lake Forest campus, and I am that lady's daughter.
Yay.
So I grew up under Rick and Kay Warren, and so obviously a pastor's kid. We've been in ministry together for about 16 years. I, too, did not anticipate marrying a pastor. In fact, it was one of the things I said that I would not do.
I didn't know that.
Really?
No. Really?
Yeah.
So glad I came to this.
Yeah, so glad you came. Yeah, I said because I didn't want anybody to have to live in Dad's shadow. So I was like, why would I put a poor man in that predicament, to have to actually live in Rick Warren's shadow? So I kind of had thought, I knew I wanted to be in ministry, but I didn't think that the pastorate was where, and Tommy wasn't interested in being a pastor as well. He had thought that he was going to do other kind of ministry, and so, but the Lord always has a sense of humor. So we've been a pastor's family now for 16 years. I do love it. I love of Saddleback Church.
You have kids?
I do. Yes, I do have kids.
I'll talk about my grandkids.
That's right. I have a 13-year-old daughter, Kaylee, and an 11-year-old daughter, Cassidy, and a 9-year-old son, Caleb. And
They're amazing.
They keep me on my toes.
Steph.
My name is Stefanie Cassetto, and my husband John and I have been married for, it'll be 18 years in May, so 1 month to our anniversary, almost 1 month.
Yeah.
And we're celebrating 20 years in ministry this summer, and we met in Bible college, so we went to a small school in Central Illinois, and we met there, and after we graduated, he immediately moved to the East Coast to do ministry at a church out there in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I moved home and then ended up at a church as a worship leader in northwestern Indiana, right outside of Chicago. And during that time, that's when we decided, when we were in 2 different places, that's when we decided to start dating and
that was
plan
wise.
and
Living in 2 different
plan a
places.
wedding. So he was living on the East Coast, I was living in Chicago, and we were planning a wedding that was going to happen in Kansas City. And so it was exciting times. We spent the first, once we were married, 12 years of our marriage for me out in New Hampshire at a church there in ministry. And then we've spent 7 years out here at Saddleback. And so it's been great. He's the worship pastor. And I've had the joy of serving right alongside him. We have 2 boys. Noah will be 14 next week, and Hayden is turning 12 in just a month. And so they're just a joy, and if you're around us on the weekend, you'll see them too. They're with us a lot of the time, and it's a lot of fun.
They're church kids.
That's right.
Like I was
Kids.
growing up with my dad.
Yep.
We were the last one to shut down the church.
Yep.
Similar kind of things.
You even get left at church by accident. Parents go home and the kid's still there.
Did I do that to you, or did you
Yeah.
do that to yours? Wait, did I do that to you?
Yeah, Dad's done that to me. I don't know if you did it, but Dad
I don't
did it.
think I would. No,
That's
is
not something
me.
you would do.
No.
But that is something Dad might
No, I'm
accidentally
paranoid about where are the kids, but I could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have
Okay.
you ever done it?
I have not left my kids at church yet. No.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm so glad that you are joining us because I'm learning things about my daughter and my family that I probably would never have learned any other way. Okay. So Shondell, you have maybe some questions for us that we can jump into here.
A common question from a lot of pastors' wives is, I've been a pastor's wife for 3 months. How can I best manage my time and responsibilities without getting burned out?
Oh gosh, that is the classic question, don't you think?
Quintessential.
How do you manage your time? And so maybe I'll go first on that just because I've been doing it the longest and hopefully doing it well most of the time. I don't know, I think that there are seasons in ministry, there's seasons of life, and there may be periods of time in which you really have to go at something full bore. I mean, you're just giving it your all. And then there becomes a season where that pressure lightens up a little bit, and then you take a little breather, and then it builds back up again. And I think we get into trouble. I was always on that search for balance, as though there really is such a thing. And I've pretty much decided I don't really think there is. I think a better way to look at it is rhythm. And so that life does kind of have these ebbs and flows that are kind of intense, and then it kind of recedes, and then it builds up again. And you need to find a rhythm that allows you to work hard for a while, but then pull back, rest, replenish, hit it again hard. I just think that the way life comes at us, it's just all not neat and tidy with this little box. You can say, well, for this period of time, it's going to be like this, and for this period of time, it's not. You kind of have to be flexible and find a rhythm. You guys have any other, has that been your experience, or you have another way of looking at it?
I totally agree. I mean, there's definitely different seasons, whether it's the season that your children are young and, you have to give them extra amounts of attention, or when they're older in sports and you're running around, so you're balancing, you're kind of trying to figure out the rhythm of family life. One of the things that I think that we've really learned, especially here at Saddleback Church, is to really protect and honor our time off, our day off. And so that's been one way that we build that into our rhythm of the week. Our weeks can look different, from season to season, from week to week, depending on what's going on in the life of our ministry. But that stays the same. So we always know that, on Monday it's a day off, it's a time to rest, it's time to replenish, it's time to hang out, do whatever we want, no matter what the rest of the week holds. And so that's one of the ways that we've...
Yeah, I totally concur with that, because we have done that from the beginning. My parents modeled that in ministry. We've modeled it. I know you and Tommy, and I know your life more than I know the other gals. I know you guys have worked on that on a day off, is to have a day off, and that it's sacred. You you don't mess with that day off. It's one of the ways that to kind of catch your body and your soul and your mind up after the intensity of a period of time or intensity of a weekend. And that day off to be quiet, to play, to unplug, reconnect, with each other. That's a sacred time. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to keep yourself from burning out. And set that pattern early. If you're just starting out in ministry, set that pattern now. It will serve you well for all the years of ministry.
It doesn't get any easier to
Yeah, it
set
doesn't
that
get any
pattern.
easier. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So you better do it now.
Exactly. That's right. Anything else you would say about
I
that?
actually have a different, I completely agree with that, but like you said, there's seasons. So
Yeah.
we started church planting, which many of you have been, and that's all hands on deck.
Yes.
You eat, you breathe, you shower, you sleep, church planting.
Yes.
That's your life.
Oozes from your pores.
Yes, exactly. And so for the first 6 years, we didn't have Core yet. I have one son. That was my life. Everything outside of work, how I travel, where we drive, was all about church planting. But as soon as we didn't build in that day off yet. But as soon as I had Koi, I noticed, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, and there had to be something. And so I did feel disconnected from him, from my husband, and that's when we felt the most exhausted.
Sure.
And so now at Saddleback, we have built in, we have kids small group on Wednesday, so that's our sacred time, my husband and I, and then we also take a couple hours on Fridays, just him and I, so that we can feel connected and push us through the rest of the week.
But I think we would all agree that it has to be something you do intentionally.
Yes.
You can't just leave it to chance.
Right.
You have to be deliberate about it and make sure that it's somewhere on your calendar every week. Great.
I think
Something
I'll
else?
just add
Yeah,
something small. I think one of the things that in the beginning of ministries, and that continues to be a conversation you have to keep having, is deciding who you're going to please, and really being able to line that up. Like, it's so easy to get into a pattern of pleasing the wrong people, and then the next thing you know, you're burnt out and you can't think straight, and you're not sure what your priorities are anymore, and you're disconnected from the people that matter most. And so something that we regularly have a conversation about is like, okay, who are we trying to please first? And so that helps us direct how we plan our weeks, how we think through our calendar, how we say yes or no, what things we say yes or no to, because if we're seeking to just please the church, then we're going to be a hot mess. So
Well, on top of that, you can't.
you can't.
It's impossible.
It's true. You can't.
You can give it your best and you
Totally.
can't.
So having that conversation with yourself and your spouse repeatedly of, okay, who are we trying to please, and what order are we pleasing these people, or who, having a hierarchy of, in our home, it's like, all right, we're going to please the Lord. That's our top goal. So our life lines up, and then how are we pleasing each other as husband and wife, and then our kids, and then we think about the church and ministry, because at the end of the day, we're coming home to each other and to our kids. And so having that kind of hierarchy of who are we trying to please, and thinking about that is a helpful.
Gives you a framework for figuring how that works together.
Yeah.
Great. Tondell, what else do you have?
Well, this is a question that just came in from a husband, actually, Gerardo. And so it's kind of for Kay and Hannah.
Okay.
How can I help and support my wife since we're trying to plant a church?
You want to take that one first?
You know what? You can be very lonely, especially the church plant, because the core group is small. It's small, and it's just you and maybe 6 other couples, or maybe even less. Early on, my husband did very gently nudged me, hey, you might want to join a women's group, which at that time I've never been part of a women's Bible study at all. So I never grew up having that kind of connection. And I was very reluctant to do so, because I was thinking, I don't know them, they don't know me.
Yeah.
Why would I spend time with them? It was, it was
Think of a million
superficial.
other things I'd rather do. Yeah.
Yes, plus the church was an hour away from our home, so it would be an extra drive for us. But he just was very persistent and gentle at the same time, and he just reminded me, I think it'll be good for you. Just go ahead and try it out. And that changed my life. That was a turning point in my spiritual walk, because at that point, I didn't know what it meant to have other mature Christians or growing Christian women around you to walk through your life, cry with you, laugh with you. And I think that was it. I love church planting because of it. We did everything together as a family. We had our first, child was there, our only child was there. They watched me get married. It was just a wonderful time. It was hard work, but it's nothing like doing it together with family. And so for us, church and family are synonymous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we'll talk about that probably in a little bit, Steph. I have some things I want to talk to you about that in a few minutes. But about just maybe I would key in on that because we started, as a church plant, and it was just me and Rick and Amy as a, 4-month-old baby. And so it was really, we had to figure out how to get support, for each other, how to get support for me, how to get support for, because it was lonely. I didn't have the group around us was a small group of people, and I would just tell, you as a pastor husband to honor your wife in that way, recognize the fact that she does need relationships. Don't expect her to, wear every other hat that you don't wear. That can be really hard. Figure out what it is, that her gifts and things that she loves to do, and as much as you can, steer her toward those things that really fit her, the way that God has shaped her and made her. There's not a whole lot about church planting, but they need an awful lot of encouragement, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're being told that we need to talk louder, so if you see us now getting louder, it's because, we're getting these notes off to the side. So, great. We are now talking loudly. Shondell, something else for us?
So, along those lines of joining the Bible study, and a very common question from pastors' wives around the world is, how does a pastor's wife combat loneliness? But we've got a specific question that just came in on the web from Karis. How do I make friends and know they're genuine?
Oh, we could spend an hour on that, couldn't we? Can I get a witness? So I'll just give you my bit on that. I started saying a little bit about the church planting thing, but I was also watching what cards they were holding up out of my line of sight. So I probably just mumbled through that whole last question. But yeah, so note to self, those of you that are helping me, I can't see the card when it's over there. Great. All right. So friendship is crucial because I think the only thing that keeps us from trying to walk on water, from trying to live perfectionists who are trying to please everybody, is to know and be known. And the only way you can know and be known is in relationships, is in friendships. And so I've always made it an intentional pursuit to look for people. If you're looking for friends, I'm going to give you a couple pieces of advice. Don't look for a brand new Christian, because a brand new Christian typically is not going to be able to handle the fact that you got stuff, that you're human. I also kind of do these little tests with people. I might share something about myself, and then I kind of wait to see if it makes its rounds, if other people know suddenly what I've said, and then I know that person isn't confidential. So you might test just little bits of your story or yourself with another person and see if they're able to contain the fact that they've shared information with you. And then the last thing I would say about that is also look for people who don't need you. I found as the pastor's wife that there were always plenty of people who wanted to be around me because of my role, because of my position. It made them feel good. It made them feel somehow that they were on the inside. And I've always looked for people who don't need me. They love me. They care about me. But we could be at the same event, and I don't even have to sit next to them because they don't need the spotlight. They love me for me. So those are like some quick tips, I would say, about looking for friends as you're trying to develop them. What have you guys found along the way?
I've lived with this my whole life. I'm very familiar with this. My kids are familiar with this. There's so many different ways to look at it. I think also looking for friendships that maybe are outside of your typical circle. Running into people at school, maybe where your kids go to school or at work. I mean, having relationships too that are outside of your church zone sometimes takes some of that pressure down. If they're not looking at you as their pastor's wife, if they're meeting you on kind of solid ground where you're equals, and so there isn't that kind of awe, maybe.
You're both baseball moms or soccer moms.
Yeah, so when you find that commonality that doesn't have to do with you being their pastor's wife, that can help to have relationships like that. And then for me, a lot of it has just been letting things grow slowly. I think there's an expectation that intimacy will happen quickly because there's connection, but the reality is the role that you're in does have a good amount of confidentiality issues. And so trust is built over time. And so letting people prove themselves slowly over time, and just accepting that that's kind of part of this role is helpful in not being disappointed.
Not being in a rush to find
not being in a
somebody.
rush. Yeah, let it happen slowly, and that's frustrating when you're lonely. That's really, really hard when you're lonely.
Yeah, Steph, what What have you found along the way?
Yeah, I would say for me, in terms of choosing friends or reaching out for friends, especially early in ministry, I always looked for people who were maybe a little further down the road than I was. And I had several friends who were older than me, who had children already or whose children were older than mine. And for me, those felt like safe friendships because I don't know if it was just the nature of the questions I were asking or the things I was looking for were coming from someone who seemed to know what they were doing, were trusted, and so I built a lot of relationships like that that just grew over time, and they remain some of my dearest friends. And then I also had some friends that were much younger than me. So I actually had friends that were the same age, but the majority of my friends were either older than I was or younger than me, and they took the shape in kind of mentoring type relationships both ways. And those remain special friendships to this very day. And so I would say maybe that would be a piece of advice, is look around for someone who looks like they're doing life or are doing things the way you would want to do them, and then I would agree with what you would say, proceed with caution, but maybe engage in relationships in those ways, just to learn from those that are ahead of you, and then be able to give back to those that are
I had one other thing I was going to say about that, but anything you would add to that, Hannah?
Yeah, just to remind them that it takes time. It's not like what Amy has said. It does take a lot of time, and it takes a little risk, right? You do have to put your foot out there a little bit more than you usually would. But it's, when you find those friends, it's so worth that risk. But it could be scary at first.
Well, and one thing I was going to say is when we first started the church, I was the oldest Christian woman. At 26, I was, the oldest Christian woman. There were people older than us, but they were young in the Lord, and so I wasn't necessarily looking to them for friendship. I really wanted to talk to other pastors' wives who were church planters or who were a little more seasoned and established in ministry, and there was nobody in my church like that. So it just so happened that this other pastor's wife who lived in the area was feeling the loneliness, feeling like she wanted to talk to other pastors' wives. So she sent out an invitation to probably 50 women in Orange County where we live, other pastors' wives, other churches, other denominations. And she said, just come to my house. I'm going to have lunch. Just come, we'll talk. And probably 25 women responded. And after that, maybe 8 or 9 stuck around, but for the next 4 years, those 8 or 9 women got together 4 times a year. Long before we had other staff wives at Saddleback that I could really connect with, there were these other pastors' wives who lived in my area. And we didn't talk about our churches, we didn't compare churches, we didn't say, well, we just did this, or we just baptized this many people. It was just about sharing our lives and the fact that we lived and that we were in ministry. So I would encourage you, if you don't have other pastors' wives or staff wives in your church, reach out to other women who live in your area. Get together, have lunch, let it be casual, don't let it be a big deal, and look for fellowship that way, because you need peer support. You need the friendships, but you also need peer support.
Right.
Hey, Shondell, what else do you have for us?
Steph, this is particularly for you. Kay referenced it earlier because we know that you have a passion about this subject. How do you blend your family and ministry?
Yeah. Well, Kay mentioned earlier, she talked about how she's felt like now balance, maybe isn't even the way to go with and using this word rhythm. And I would say John and I, we've kind of approached our ministry and our family life in a similar way, in terms of we would choose to use the word blend family and ministry rather than try and balance family and ministry. We found that whenever we try to balance the two things, something always ends up getting the short end of the stick. And so we've made the choice to blend our family and our ministry lives together. And for me, it was a natural choice. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but I grew up in a pastor's home, and my mom worked in the church as well. She had a job outside the home, but then she also served in the church. She was the choir director and the worship leader. And so from a very young age, I saw my parents doing ministry together. And I saw them, of course, in my home as well. And I can remember conversation around the dinner table that had to do with church stuff. And I can remember wanting to spend so much time at the church. I love the church. And I thank God to this day that whatever the stereotypical idea of a pastor's kid is, how they grow up and maybe resent the church or resent their parents for being involved in ministry, that he he protected me from that. And in fact, he planted seeds of just great love for the church in my heart, and I'm so thankful for that. And so I saw early on, what it looked like to have parents in ministry and be in ministry and kind of all blended together. And then in our ministry on the East Coast, the church that we worked at in the very beginning, it was right around 150 people. So it was this very small church. And, similar to probably church planning, it's small, so it's very familial. And so the pastor and his wife and their family, they would have us in their home. They would have other church members in their home. There was a great deal of hospitality and the idea of getting to know one another. And so as I was serving in ministry alongside my husband, I also felt this kindredness, this, being a part of something really special. I had people who knew me and loved me, and it wasn't because of my role in the church, and it wasn't because of my non-role in the church. It was just because of who I was, and I happened to also serve alongside them in the church. And there's something special that happens because those people were there, when we got married. They were there for the birth of our children, and we were sharing life and ministry together. And so I really, truly did not know there was any other way to do it. And so as we have grown and become more seasoned in ministry and our responsibilities have shifted and changed, we have just kind of made that the way we do it. We're like, we're going to put all of our life in one big pot. That's how I describe it. And it's all going to slosh around, and it's going to get messy and jumbled together, and it's going to spill over the sides. But for me, I would rather be tending one pot rather than try and be,
Stirring
a
yeah.
whole bunch of different pots on different burners. I use the example of our boys, who I said now are 14, almost 14 and almost 12. They love being at the church. In fact, they think our team, the team that we work with, Saddleback Worship, is their team. They ask us questions like it's their business. And we enjoy sharing it with them. And we enjoy knowing that they know these people. We feel like there's a good deal of value in letting these people who are on our team, who are leaders in our church, be able to speak into our children's lives. They show up at basketball games. They take our kids out to movies, and so there's this ebb and flow. And then we do the same. We've been able to share the joy of having some of our other leaders' children in our home while they go away on a quick vacation. And there's so much joy in kind of seeing this cycle of ministry and give and receive, and I just think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture.
It's like a big plate of spaghetti.
It is.
You don't have little compartments. Yeah. Your life is like all these spaghetti noodles wound together.
I think there is always a place for boundaries, and there's always a place for margin. I don't want to exclude that from the conversation, but for us, we've just found that anytime we've seen people draw a line in the sand and say, "This is my ministry life, my job, and this is my family life." And you have a toe that creeps over to one side, and I think that's where seeds of bitterness and resentment can start to grow and take root. And we just have never wanted any of that. And so, because you can't, at Saddleback, when we have so many Christmas services in the Christmas season, if I were to try and make that even Steven with my family life and my ministry life, we would be setting ourselves up for failure. And so that's where we say, all right, we're going to do family time at the church. Boys, you're going to come with us. It's going to be fun. And that has actually become their Christmas tradition. We try and send them, back home for Christmas before us. And they're like, no way. We want to be at the Christmas services. Duh, Mom, Dad.
Yeah.
That's where we're supposed to be. And so I can give countless, ways that we've seen God show up. And we feel like that system is working for us. And again, it's something that we're constantly checking, or we're holding before him and saying, what does it look like in this season? What does it look like in the next season? How do we need to do things now? But our primary thing is, how can we bring our family along with us and not make it feel like it's a tug of war over this line in the middle, but that we enjoy it all together.
And there's another side to it, and you alluded to that. And I was thinking of something that I learned early on from some of the folks who study clergy families, and they were talking about that if there is not that clergy families who are able to disengage from the work, from the ministry, to some degree, that they have a better longevity. That there needs to also be, so it's like this, it's like both sides of the coin. There's the coin of life and ministry flow together, and then there also needs to be some place where you can disengage so that everything about who you are is not tied to the church. Because I am a person, I'm a woman, I'm a follower of Christ, but my pastor's wife does not define who I am.
Not my core identity.
It's not my core identity. Yeah, Amy, talk about that, because just about identity, that just reminded me. I know that's not one of the questions, but just a minute or two about, because I know that's something you really feel passionate about, identity.
And I think when I watch the Cassettos do life, they have really found. Anybody who watches them knows, they have found a really good. They have found a really good rhythm. The Cassettos have done a really good job. Their children are happy and contented, and it works really well for them. That doesn't work as well for our family, but I have some extra needs, that are in our life. My kids.
But tell them why, because everybody might not know.
Yeah,
why you say that.
I've lived with chronic illness, and so this is the most well that I've been in over a decade, and so. And I've had children with chronic illness. And so the limitations of my life were really, really great. And so it wasn't as free and flowy and beautiful as they have been able to make it happen. But that's what God has called them to.
Right.
God had called me to something different. And so us figuring out how to make that work. And so for me, a big part was not having my identity wrapped up in being the pastor's wife or church family, because I couldn't do it the way I wanted to do it. And so to have my identity really built into that was crushing, because it was never up to par. Not my own expectations, forget anybody else's. And so I had to redefine what makes me valuable and what makes me have a contribution and what makes my life worthy and purposeful. And so I had to really kind of redefine identity as a pastor's wife for me, because I could not live to the fullest that I wanted. All my dreams kind of just got popped one by one. And so there has to be freedom too for us to find our identity in something that's not in our husband's job or our ministry, especially for those of us who've had some pretty grand limitations. So,
Amy, can you talk about that more specifically?
Because we saw a question on that.
Katie had a question that came in on the web. What if you're a pastor's wife who has become chronically ill?
Yeah.
You are only able to attend church minimally and unable to do ministry. It's hard not to feel judged and misunderstood. So could you go ahead and elaborate
Absolutely.
on that?
Yeah, I get that to a really deep, deep level. I too spent years unable to attend services, and it had even gotten to the place where it was so distressing for my kids to see me sick that we had kind of come up with elaborate plans where we would get me ready to go to church, and then I would stay in the car. We'd drop the kids off and make them think I was actually going into church when I wasn't. And I get the all-encompassing limitation that illness can be. And then to be a pastor's wife on top of that, and then to have everybody watching and wondering, and depending on your community, if they're supportive or not supportive, I mean, that can be incredibly stressful and difficult. I think it has to come back to that place of giving yourself the same kind of grace that Jesus gives us. I had to learn very quickly how to let go of other people's expectations and just live in the expectation of Jesus. We could talk for a long time. That's not been this fluid, seamless, uphill trajectory of awesomeness. It's been a wrestle. A lot of tears and blood, sweat, and tears of just wrestling that to the ground of like, why, God? Like, why is this my story? Why would you call me to this and then hold me back? And why is this my story? And I've said it before, one of the things that really helped me was studying the story of Mary and Martha. I've heard it 100 times, you probably have too, but really hanging out in that passage of Scripture has given me so much clarity and so much freedom, because Jesus looks at Martha and tells her that Mary has chosen the better part, and those few words, the better part, are some of the most freeing words in Scripture, because absolutely everybody can have the better part. You can be ill, you can be bedridden, you can be old, you could be blind, you could be deaf, you could be poor, you could be in a remote part of the world, you could be living in the middle of the city. You can have 10 kids, you can have no kids. You can be married, you can be single. Like, you can have the better part. And the better part is sitting at the feet of Jesus and knowing him intimately and getting your identity and your purpose and your relationship all from the Father. And so when I really began to embrace that, some of the scales of bitterness and anger and resentment began to kind of crack, you know, like the hard cement in my heart began to break up of how could this be, why?
Yeah.
But understanding that Jesus has called me to the better part, and he's called everybody to the better part, and so there's no comparison. Like, she may be getting to speak and write and teach and travel, and she may stand next to her husband on the stage, and she may do this and that, but Jesus is looking at my life with a heavenly lens, and he's not looking at my life through a 21st century lens or an evangelical lens or a Southern Baptist lens or any other lens. He's looking at my life through a heavenly lens, and the heavenly lens says that my life is all about relationship with the Father. And I can have the better part, and you can too.
Okay, so Amy and I just taped a conversation specifically about living with chronic illness and soul care. And in a few weeks, you can go to kwarren.com. We've just made this tape, and you'll be able to see a longer conversation about that. So I'm going to let Hannah maybe talk about that a little, but you can hear more from Amy at kwarren.com shortly. Stay tuned for that one. Hannah, anything you want to add to that, even about, like, I'm taking Shonda, I'll come back to you in a second, but I just want to keep this thread here for a second of walking through some harder times, darker times, and what that's looked like for you, and where you found God, or where you've struggled, or tell us kind of from your story.
Right. So we have one.
Loudly.
We have one child. It's a 6-year-old boy, Coy, and we're still trying. We've been trying. We're still trying. It took us 3 years to have Coy. Our first pregnancy was actually a miscarriage, and that was when I was in the church plant. So it's a much smaller, family-like community. I didn't tell everyone I had a miscarriage, but because they were walking side by side with me, they just, they knew, and they gently came over and just, loved on me as best as they can, because as you know, there's nothing that anyone can say that'll just make you feel better. So, I felt very loved. I felt known. Being known was so important. And they still prayed, and they prayed, and then Coy was born. So it was a beautiful story. Fast forward, Coy is now 6. We just had a major loss again in August. We're in Saddleback now, so it's a larger congregation, and I was lost. I didn't know, first of all, I didn't even though the story of how we got pregnant itself was such an amazing miracle story, I didn't even know who to tell. Obviously my small group, but because the way Kevin and I live life, church and family, is so synonymous, but at the same time it's larger. So how do you're pregnant, but you're only 5 weeks. Who do I tell? Who do I not tell? I chose not to tell anyone at the time, and I thought, okay, since we've had miscarriages before, let's just wait. So when we did miscarry, then I was even more devastated, because I was completely alone at that point. How can I tell someone I miscarried when I didn't even tell you that I was pregnant in the first place? So it was really strange, and I am a perfectionist and try to stuff. You cry and you're devastated at home, but then, okay, it's time for church. Let's go. Let's wipe off the tears. So I went, and I remember feeling really numb. It was very strange walking through the hallways. Everyone's saying, what they usually say, hi, how are you? That's, even if they don't mean it, that's what you say, hi, how are you? And what do you say? I'm actually pretty honest, so I did say, I'm not feeling very well, and they said, what happened? And I'm thinking, I'm not gonna, and some people, I decide, okay, I'm just gonna say I'm fine, and I'm walking and I'm thinking, you have no idea what just happened. And that's what happened to me over and over again. I walk through there and I'm thinking, you're all smiling, and you just have no idea what I've just been through. So I did confide in very good friends who are also pastors' wives, like Shondell and Brenda Keck, and they sweetly told me and gently reminded me, well, maybe it would be good, because I'm a person who can't keep these things in. So they what's the word? I can't contain my feelings.
What's the word? Effervescent. I'll get here.
So, she did say, maybe if you find a group of women who you trust, it would help relieve this, this
Right.
burning.
Grief. Well, the grief that
Right,
you were
and I
feeling.
didn't know how to. I mean, I was completely new to this. It was this miscarriage was exponentially harder than my first one because we had been trying so long. And I always say this is how I feel because I've had a taste of pregnancy and it was so good. So when I was pregnant, I was on a super high.
Yeah.
And then when it was taken from me, I mean, I fell lower than I could have ever thought I would feel. And so I did decide to share with a small group of women, and I just bore my heart. I could have written 1,000 words, but my husband always says, cut it short because they don't have all day. But I sent it out, and the words that came back, again, it didn't take away the pain, but to be known and be connected is so important through any phase of life, especially if you're going through a difficulty.
It is.
And so I did share it with those women, and it meant the world to me. So that when they come see me, a hug and a touch, that's all you need.
Yeah.
So that you're not walking the hallways
Right.
thinking, no
No
one
one
knows.
has to fake it,
Yes,
or
I
you
have
have
to
to
fake
fake
it. I
it.
have to pretend that everything is
That
well.
I'm not struggling and I'm not hurting
Right.
and I'm not aching.
And so to be transparent is, I think, has been so crucial or so essential to ministry life because I just can't. I can't contain in everything, and
Yeah.
to be someone else
Yeah.
would be impossible
Right.
for me.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks. Thank you.
yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Shonda?
A couple of questions about working outside the home.
You keep
Linda
telling us
asked,
to talk louder.
Louder.
So I say
Yeah.
next Facebook Live, a
Mic or
stronger mic solution. Go ahead, Shonda. Sorry.
Linda asked, do any of you work outside the home? And then Meta from Denmark asked, is it ever a challenge to be authentic in your job where you are also a role model?
That's great. Steph, you work outside the home. You do too, Hannah. So
Yes. I work at the church, so I do work at Saddleback Church, and I kind of walk that line of, working at the church, partnering with my husband in ministry, and then the family life. And again, I would say for us, we've done that by just putting it all in that one big pot. I guess I kind of echo just a little bit of what Hannah just said in terms of why we do it that way and how we make it work. I just can't fathom trying to split the two apart. And I know it's like right now you're saying, well, your job is at the church, your job is with your husband. And so I agree that there are things that the way that is set up that probably do make it a little more natural in order for us to kind of have that kind of flow. But I can't imagine trying to separate those things. And, it goes back to you too, because who I am, I don't feel like my identity is my role. My first identity is that I am a child of God. And I carry that with me no matter where I walk, whether it's through my home, through the office, on the platform, backstage, all those things. And so that is what I carry first and foremost. And maybe that is the thing that is the unifier.
Gel.
That's the gel that sticks it all together. It's the why of everything. And so I guess that's one of the things. I would say in my early years of ministry, I had 3 jobs outside of the home. And I did those 3 jobs. I worked at the Gap doing backstock and loading things out onto the floor. I taught voice lessons out of our home, and then I worked teaching music for K through 6th graders once a week on Fridays. And I did those 3 jobs that were part-time and flexible so that I could be in ministry alongside John and in the church where I really wanted to be. I did those things obviously to make ends meet as well, but I knew that they were kind of the lesser, and so I do know what it's like to walk into a place where you're not the pastor's wife, but I can picture faces from the Gap, people who we love, who we got to rub shoulders with in that season, who stepped foot into our church, and those are just, it makes it also worth it. And so again, my world's just kind of collided in those ways.
How about you, Hannah?
Right.
Loudly.
So, okay.
Loud Hannah.
Loud Hannah.
Okay. Yes, I'm very loud.
Well, so turn it on. Turn it on, girl. Turn it on.
So it was very different for me coming into marriage. I graduated as a pharmacist, so I actually chose pharmacy before I even met my husband, before I even dated, thinking, okay, I'm going to choose pharmacy because it's flexible. At the time, I can find a job pretty easily, so I can follow my husband everywhere. So that's why I originally went into it. But we did land, God gave us a job at Amgen, a pharmaceutical company here in California. And it was great, except I was always in ministry, and it was also our first year of marriage. So the balance, juggling several pots, was almost impossible. But of course, we just married, so I thought, of course I can do it because I'm perfect.
Superwoman.
Yes. So the beginning years were pretty hard. We didn't have a child yet, so I could balance them. You're right. It did slowly take a lesser role, which is not how typically women in society are raised. So when I graduated, I thought, I'm going to climb the ladder, I'm going to do really well, I'm going to do all this stuff, and I would put 125% in it, but what that means is you leave nothing for your family life. And through a lot of tears, I figured that out, and I thought, something's got to change or else we're just going to break. And so, although I had the cushion job, we let it go. And God had blessed us I was able to do the same thing, but I can work from home. So I still worked full time, but I was flexible. So we were very creative, just like the blending, we were very creative. If he's also an adjunct faculty, so if he had to teach somewhere, I would go with him, and then I would work while he's teaching class. And even after COI, our family time would be on the road. So we would go with him to CBU. He taught a class at CBU. We'd go with him. He would teach a class, COI, run around through the grass fields. We'd go get ice cream, and then we'd go home together. Then we came to Saddleback. Again, just the volume of work or ministry they had to do was exponentially larger, so it did wear on me a lot. So I did cut back to a part-time job. And so that way I could support my family, because my family came first. And I wasn't able to do that through a 40-hour work week. And that took a lot for me to realize, because as an Asian person, you graduate with your degree and then you use your degree. You don't just put it on the shelf somewhere.
Novel idea.
So, so it was very hard for me. I mean, and after I took part-time, I thought, man, why didn't I do this sooner? And now I'm thinking I shouldn't even work. But anyway, that's a side note. But how do I do that? I do, and there's a verse in Colossians that says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if you're working for the Lord. And so even though I'm working on in the work field outside, I know that God's using you.
Absolutely.
And you don't have to open the Bible everywhere, but they're watching you. They're seeing how do you handle criticism, how do you handle comments and stuff, how do you just walk through life, and they notice these things.
Absolutely.
They'll notice that there may be something different. And if you have side conversations with your coworker, that's what you live for, right? You live for that moment that says, there's something different about you. Or what do you do on the weekends? Well, let me tell you what I do on the weekends. Why don't you come with us? So I actually, because the work as a pastor's wife is very cumbersome sometimes, but I do love having that avenue of working in the workforce. So,
as well.
Yes.
Have time for probably a few more questions.
Our next conversation needs to be at least 2 hours, because
Great.
we're not getting through the questions at all. But
sorry. So we will maybe just let you ask the questions, and we will make our answers faster so that you can get to the things that you want to say.
No, I'm saying our next conversation just needs to be longer.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
A couple hours. Because this follows about that working outside the home. So if we could answer this one a little bit quicker, but it's so important. Derica asks, how do you handle financial sacrifices with grace? And how do you sacrifice for the church and not become calloused?
Great question.
Really, a follow-up question was that, how can I not become cynical or hypocritical in my role as a pastor's wife?
Great.
How do you handle those financial stresses?
You know, the reality is that I'd say a large portion of those that are in ministry live at a much lower economic level than their peers. I mean, we all know that you could probably be making much more money in a different place, and that's a reality. And you might look at me and think that I know nothing about that. So, because everybody knows, I mean, let's just be honest, purpose-driven life sold a lot of books, and it changed our lives financially. But up to that point, having grown up in a pastor's home, we really had only enough to get by every month. We never had more. We never had more than we had enough, but that's all we had. And so I grew up. All of my life was shaped around how do we make do kind of with what we have. How do I live with the fact that my friends, my peers, have all sorts of things that I don't have. They got a car when they were 16, or they, just things that we all look at, and I didn't have. We didn't grow up with that ability. And then even when we started the church, we had nothing. Literally, we were on support. People had to help support us because there was no church to pay for us. So we've lived at that level. And then after we started the church, again, we were living. I was actually, don't laugh, but I was actually getting ready to take in ironing. I was going to, because nobody irons, right? And I know how to iron. And I was going to iron and get paid for it because I had little kids and I didn't want to leave them. And so I did childcare in my home. You were too young to remember this, but I did childcare in my home for a while and decided I loved my children and not other people's children. So I didn't do that for long, but I did it. And then I was getting ready to do ironing sort of when the book took off and changed our lives. So I've kind of been at all those different levels, and have had the opportunity to, even as a kid, to know that we were making some sacrifices for the good of the kingdom of God, and that God would take care of our needs. I was talking to one of our other staff wives a few months ago about this, and she said, I reframe that. She said, I actually think most people live beyond their means, and so we've decided that rather than not having enough, we're actually living within our means when most people aren't. And I just loved the way that she took that and kind of reframed it. What do you guys, jump in there quickly? Sorry, it took longer than I was supposed to.
You answered it well.
Oh, okay.
I think you answered it well.
All right, so we will move on to the next question.
Okay, I'm going to read you 4 questions
Oh, boy.
because they all
Go together in a
encompass the same thing,
Great.
and we don't have a lot of time.
Great.
How do I deal with criticism? Me, my husband, our church.
Tell them
Yeah.
to go away.
Yaya asks, how do I handle women in the congregation that don't like me?
Yeah.
Kim
They
asks,
need
how
to
do
go
you
away
handle
too.
friends leaving? What?
We said they need to go away.
Kim said, how do you handle friends leaving the church? And Renette asked, how do you accept church members politely leaving for better programs at another church? And how do you rebond and learn to trust again and again and again?
Who wants to jump into that one?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, okay, I'll jump into that
So
one.
you start.
Okay, I'll start and then we'll go from there. It hurts. Let's just be honest, it hurts when people don't like you, or people are critical, or when you have poured yourself out in a ministry and then they come and they tell you we're leaving because this church over there does a better job at preaching the Bible than you do, or they've got a better program, or they've got a better worship team, or they've got a better whatever. And it hurts. There's just no doubt about it. It's like a knife in your heart to know that you have been there for people, in their hard times. You were there at their, you married them, you buried family members, you were there when they were struggling, and you poured into their Christ-like character so that they become mature believers, and then they leave. It is one of the deepest pains in ministry, and at first it was harder for me, especially criticism. It was harder for me. I took it very personally. Rick's personality is more like, their problem, and I'm like, no, it's my problem. And so just having to understand that criticism in a nutshell is you have to treat it the way you would the way you eat a fish. When you eat a fish, you eat the meat and then you throw away the bones. So if somebody's critical of you or your husband or your ministry, you have to stop and look at it. You have to say, is there any truth here? Even if I don't like the person who just told me about it, is there any truth here? If there's any truth, you need to take it, learn from it, be gracious. If there's apologies that need to be made, if you need to make changes, and then you kind of toss out the rest. Sometimes everything that was said to you is wrong. It's off base. It's a total misjudgment of a situation. And in those situations, at the end of the day, you have to forgive. Yeah. I mean, you and I have to forgive because people are going to hurt you in ministry. And sometimes they're going to say the most horrendous things. They're going to say horrendous things about your kids. They're going to put pressure on you or your husband. And what else? What other choice do we have, really? We take what, if there's true criticism there that we can learn from, we take it, we absorb it, we make those changes, and then those stuff that's left over, the residue, the painfulness, the bitterness, the part of you that wants to go, but they are just not a nice person, and all the things you want to say about them. At the end of the day, you end up with, I have to forgive. For my own soul's sake, I have to forgive. And so I would say to you, see if there's any truth to it, take it, apply it, and then you've got to go back and spend time with God and just say, Lord, I forgive this person again and again and again if necessary, because I don't want my soul to shrivel. I don't want my soul to get small over this hurt.
That's what I would say. I think ministry does take a bit of thick skin, but what it cannot take is a hard heart. And so your skin might have to be tough. You toughen up your skin, but don't let your heart grow tough.
That's good.
Keep your heart soft, because it really is truly all about people. And people are messy. People are hard. It's difficult. But I think God asks us to do the hard things. He asks us to walk into the hard places of ministry. Just a quick story, like we've had people, John and I work in the worship ministry, and so worship is music, peace, and it's a very,
lots of comments about that, don't they?
Comment cards all the time. So it's very personal. People have preferences, strong preferences about the way their music sounds. It's too loud, it's too soft, it's too fast, it's too slow. And so we've heard messages like that for 20 years from different people. And I can remember, we have chosen to put our purpose over our preference, our personal preferences, and the purpose over the preferences, because we, of course, a people pleaser. We want to do we want to make everyone happy. Well, that's impossible to make everyone happy. And so there have been times where we have had people who we love, people who we are hard to love, who are grumpy with the music, who have said we're leaving, we're out. And I can remember one time a person did that. They left because they were done with the music too much, and we were like, you had to let them go. They have to go. They came back around, because what happened was, and these people looked at us right in the face and said, I don't like the music that you're playing. I don't like the way it sounds, but you know what? My granddaughter does. And she's here. And if you're playing something that gets my granddaughter into church, then I'm here too. And so I feel like there are seasons where we have to say, okay, we have to stick to what we feel God is calling us to do. We have to let someone go, let someone leave. And you never know what God's going to do with that outside of there. So anyway, he might bring them back around, in a new and exciting way.
Just briefly, I think that it's negativity attracts negativity, and so it's really easy when you have found one critical person to find 7 around them. And so whether they be,
why is that?
That
is true.
Well, they group together. They just group together, and so whether that's people who are your members or your staff or people who just hear about your church from the community, whatever that may be, they seem to come in crowds. And so I have found myself many times I'm hearing from one person and then another person and another person. All of a sudden my bucket is just full of so much negativity, and I don't have perspective anymore. And so when dealing with critical people, it's really important to counterbalance the negativity. And there's the Bible, there's a wisdom in a multitude of counsel. And so don't make sure that, like, when you're assessing input, that you're not getting from the same crowd. That you're counterbalancing it with people who are totally of a different mindset or have something completely different to say about you or your husband or your church. And so it's really easy to all of a sudden just be in a cesspool and you don't even know what to do anymore, and you can't think clear. So
your perspective gets a little warped.
Really warped. And so it's important to try and counterbalance the negativity, and to also recognize that you can't be a receptacle bin for your husband. You cannot be the place where everybody can come and tell you everything about that's wrong with your husband or the church, and you're just supposed to hold it all, that as if you can do something. And so putting firm limits on who you allow to speak into your life and who you allow to give you counsel or even complaints. There are certain people, you just know them across the room that they've got 10 things to tell you, and none of them are going to be positive. And so you have to decide it.
Walk
Walk
the
the
way.
way.
That's what
You
I
have to determine if that's somebody that you're going to continue to allow to have a voice.
I got really good at saying to people who would come up to me with that, the complaints about Rick. They figured, they couldn't get through to him, so they would tell me so that I would pass it on. And I just got really good at saying, I really appreciate that that's been a hard place for you, or you've got some issues with the staff. And I really encourage you to take that. I would never say, I'm not, you don't do it with a chip on your shoulder.
Right.
You don't do it with defensiveness or with an attitude. I would just say, I would smile and just say, man, that's hard. I just want you to know I'm not able to do anything about that, but I really encourage you to talk to Rick or make an appointment or write a letter. In other words, point them on to whoever the person is that can do something about that. You don't have to let yourself be that punching bag, or as Amy says, the receptacle, but you have to decide that you're not going to take it. And you do it gently, you do it with kindness, you do it with, but you just make it, there's a boundary here. I'm not able to accept all of that. So that's great word. Shondell, you have anything else this week?
Okay, I've got one last question for
last
Kay,
question.
but before I say that, I wanted to tell you some of the places that people have listened from. But one place is from Kansas.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Hey.
Steph's
All
mom,
three
who's a
people,
pastor's wife, is watching. So you have to say hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom. I love
so
you.
Hi, Steph's mom.
But from California and Texas and New Jersey and Washington and Denmark and Sweden and Poland and the Philippines and Colombia and Nigeria, Switzerland and Jamaica
Oh my
are
goodness.
some of the places that
gives
we
me goosebumps.
captured.
That gives me
As
goosebumps.
we're wrapping up, though, Kay, you've just written a new book called Sacred Privilege, Your
Honey,
Life
but you should mention
and
that.
Ministry as a Pastor's Wife. Could you tell us about it?
Yes, I would love to. Yes, I have written a book sort of distilling all these 42 years of ministry into, people always say, so what if you've only got one thing to say, or what would you tell me as a pastor's wife? And so this book is the distillation of all of that, what I've learned, what I've, where I've grown, what I feel like are important things to say. And I've written it for people who are just starting out, so hopefully you can set a good course for yourself in ministry. Written it for people who are in the middle, like these gals have all been in ministry 13, 16, 20 years, so I kind of count them in that middle years. There's always more to grow. There's always more to learn. There's always more ways to make course corrections. And then I've written it for people like me who are sort of at that closer end of, closer to the end of the ministry years at Saddleback than at the beginning. And because, again, we all want to finish well. So Sacred Privilege, Your Life and Ministry as a Pastor's Wife. It's available May 2nd, but pre-sale, if you go to kwarren.com. And I got to read it right, so I say it right. You go to kwarren.com/sacred privilege, and you can, if you put in the pre-order number from, am I doing that right? Thank you. Put pre-order number, then you get the first chapter of the book audio, free. You get a Q&A that I did with pastors' wives, free. You get a bunch of printable, downloadable stuff, prayers, all this neat stuff. So kwarren.com /
And Ginsu knives.
wait, I'm not through, / sacred privilege, and you get the Ginsu knives. That's right. So it's been so amazing to be with you. Thank you for hanging out with us. Hope that some of what we've said has been meaningful and has encouraged you in your walk as a pastor's wife, that you know that there are people who care about you, that you walk away going, you know what, if nothing else, I'm going to look for some people where I can know and be known, where I can, people that will encourage me in my walk, and that, I don't know, I really believe that being in ministry is a sacred privilege. If I didn't, I would have called it something else, but I really, really do believe after all these years, it's a sacred privilege, and we're glad that you joined us today.